Admiral Zivik stood at the edge of what humans called a playground, his four eyes narrowing as he watched the chaotic scene before him. His thick, scaled fingers tapped against the datapad, creating a rhythmic clicking that matched his growing agitation. This was not what he had expected when the Galactic Confederation assigned him to assess Earth's military capabilities. "And you say this is mandatory training?" he asked, his universal translator struggling to maintain its composure as a group of small humans raced past, their high-pitched squeals making his sensory ridges quiver. Dr. Emily Taylor, the pediatric behavioral specialist assigned to his observation team, tried to suppress her smile. "No, Admiral. This is recess at Lincoln Elementary. The children are just playing." "Playing," Zivix repeated the word as if it might bite him. His junior analyst, Lieutenant Corell, was frantically recording data nearby, her slender form practically vibrating with excitement. "Admiral," Corell called out, her voice pitched higher than usual. "You need to see this. The small humans, they're executing perfect Rhodian battle formations." Zivix swept across the playground, his ceremonial cape billowing behind him despite the lack of wind. A trick all Confederation admirals learned in their first year. He stopped short at the sight that had captured Corell's attention. A group of young humans, none taller than his waist, were engaged in what appeared to be an elaborate ritual involving two rotating cables and synchronized jumping. "Double Dutch," Dr. Taylor supplied helpfully. "It's a jump rope game. The kids love it." "Love," Zivix muttered, watching as a small human female with pigtails executed a series of precise movements that would have qualified her for special operations training in at least 3 Confederation species. "This is not love, Doctor. This is advanced training in timing, spatial awareness, and group coordination." A boy with a gap-toothed grin approached them, clutching what Zivix immediately classified as a primitive projectile weapon, round, red, and rubber. "Wanna play Foursquare with us? We need one more." Zivix drew himself up to his full height, his scales shifting to a formal purple hue. "Young human, I am Admiral Zivix of the 7th Fleet, decorated veteran of the Proxima Centauri conflict, and Supreme Commander of—" "You can be player 4, the boy interrupted, pointing to a crude grid painted on the ground. "Just don't bounce it too hard or Ms. Rodriguez will make us use the foam ball instead." Dr. Taylor intervened before Zivix could begin another recitation of his titles. "Maybe later, Tommy. The Admiral is here to observe today." Zivix watched as Tommy shrugged and ran off to recruit another player. His attention was drawn to a different group of children who had arranged themselves into 2 opposing forces, with a single human child standing in the middle of what was clearly a designated combat zone. "What tactical exercise is this?" he demanded, already reaching for his emergency beacon in case he needed to alert the fleet. "Oh, that's just duck, duck, goose," Dr. Taylor explained. One person walks around the circle, tapping each person's head and saying duck until they choose someone to be the goose. Then they have to run around the circle and try to sit in the empty spot before getting caught. Zivix's scales paled to a sickly yellow. "By the 7 moons," he whispered. "They're training them in target selection, pursuit tactics, and circular combat maneuvers, in broad daylight. And no one notices." Lieutenant Corell's datapad was smoking slightly from the speed of her note-taking. "Admiral, according to my preliminary analysis, this duck-duck-goose exercise has a 78.3% success rate in teaching evasion techniques. That's higher than our Academy's 2nd-year combat training program." Zivix watched as a small human successfully completed the circle, sliding into position milliseconds before their pursuer could catch them. The other children erupted in cheers and laughter, their celebration masking the military precision of what he'd just witnessed. "Dr. Taylor," he said gravely, "I believe we may have severely underestimated your species' military preparation programs. I must contact High Command immediately." As he turned to leave, a jump rope whizzed past his head with lethal accuracy, and more children streamed by playing something called tag. His scales shifted to emergency crimson. Humanity wasn't just preparing for war. They had turned it into a game. And somehow, that was infinitely more terrifying. What in the name of the eternal void is that marking on the ground? Admiral Zivix demanded, his scales rippling with confusion as he pointed at the numbered squares chalked onto the playground pavement. Mike Rodriguez, Lincoln Elementary's PE teacher, bounced a small stone in his palm. This? Just hopscotch, Admiral. Here, let me show you how it works. He tossed the stone onto square one and demonstrated the hopping sequence, his movements casual and practiced. Lieutenant Carell's datapad chirped in alarm. Admiral, these movements, they're identical to the zero-gravity maneuver patterns in the Confederation's Advanced Combat Manual. Zivix's 4 eyes widened simultaneously, a rare display of genuine shock. Impossible. Those sequences took our best military minds decades to perfect. He watched as a line of children formed, each waiting their turn to navigate the chalked battlefield. Sarah Martinez, a first grader with untied shoelaces and missing front teeth, stepped up to the course. The stone flew from her small hand with surprising precision, landing exactly in square 7. What followed left the alien observers in stunned silence. Sarah hopped, twisted, and balanced her way through the course with the grace of a Centaurian blade dancer. Single foot, double foot, pivot, retrieve. Each movement flowing into the next with unconscious expertise. By the sacred scales, Zivix whispered, his ceremonial cape drooping in defeat. She's executing a perfect Halthori recovery sequence. Our cadets train for 3 years to achieve that level of balance control. Mr. Rodriguez grinned. Pretty good for a 6-year-old, right? She practices every recess. Practices. The Admiral's scales flashed warning patterns of deep crimson and violet. You mean she engages in this combat training? Voluntarily. Hey, Mr. Space Guy. Sarah called out, her smile revealing her newly missing teeth. Wanna try? It's super fun. Before Zivix could formulate a properly dignified response befitting his rank, he found himself being gently pushed toward the hopscotch court by his own junior officers. Lieutenant Carell had already calculated that refusing would damage their diplomatic relations with these surprisingly advanced young warriors. I am a graduate of the Confederation's Elite Combat Academy, Zivix muttered, trying to maintain his dignity as he held a small stone over square one. This should be well within my capabilities. What followed would later be classified as Incident Report Number 47, the Hopscotch Hypothesis Confirmation. Admiral Zivix, decorated veteran of 3 galactic conflicts, discovered that his advanced combat training was surprisingly inadequate for the challenges of children's playground games. His first hop sent him wobbling dangerously to one side. The second had him tangled in his own ceremonial cave. By the third, he was desperately trying to maintain balance while a group of first graders offered helpful advice. You gotta bend your knees more, Sarah coached from the sidelines. Keep your arms out for balance. Another child added helpfully. Lieutenant Carell was torn between recording the event for tactical analysis and pretending she didn't know her commanding officer as he hopped awkwardly across the numbered squares. The final disaster came when Zivix attempted to retrieve his stone. As he bent down on one leg, his center of gravity shifted, and the mighty Admiral of the 7th Fleet hobbled sideways into an ungraceful heap. A moment of silence fell over the playground. Then Sarah walked over and patted his scaled arm sympathetically. That's okay, Mr. Space Guy. You just need more practice. Everybody falls their first time. Zivix rose with as much dignity as he could muster, his scales cycling through various embarrassed shades of blue. Lieutenant Carell, prepare a priority message for High Command. Subject: Human Training Methodologies. Most urgent. What should I say about your performance, Admiral? Carell asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Tell them. He watched as Sarah resumed her flawless execution of the course. Tell them that human children are achieving in minutes what takes our best soldiers years to master, and recommend immediate integration of hopscotch into our basic training programs. As they left the playground that day, Zivix couldn't shake the image of Sarah's perfect balance and coordination. The Confederation had grossly underestimated Earth's military preparation programs. They weren't just training warriors, they were starting from the cradle itself. And somewhere in his report, though he'd never admit it, he requested a private hopscotch court for additional research purposes. "It's a simple game, Admiral," Katie Williams explained, her blonde pigtails bouncing as she outlined the rules. "When I say green light, everyone moves forward. When I say red light and turn around, everyone has to freeze. If I catch you moving, you go back to the start." Admiral Zivix's scales shifted to a thoughtful shade of azure as he watched 20 children line up against the playground wall. Behind him, Lieutenant Krell had called in Commander Engstix, the Confederation's leading expert in stealth operations, to observe this supposedly simple game. "Impossible," Commander Engstix scoffed, his chameleonic skin rippling with dismissive patterns. No untrained civilian could spot micro-movements faster than a trained stealth operative. Katie shrugged, turned to face the wall, and shouted, "Green light." The children surged forward, their movements a chaotic blend of running, tiptoeing, and tactical crawling. Zivix's sensory ridges twitched as he recognized several advanced infiltration techniques being executed by 8-year-olds who had never seen a military manual. Red light. Katie spun around with devastating speed. 20 children froze in positions that would have made a stellar Marine proud. Commander Engstix's jaw dropped as he witnessed perfect stillness from humans who, moments ago, had been arguing about whose turn it was on the swings. "Jimmy, I saw you wiggle. Back to the start." Katie pointed at a boy who had apparently twitched an eyebrow. "Fascinating," Zivix muttered. "The children are learning to control even involuntary muscle movements. This is beyond even our Phase 3 stealth training." Commander Engstix smoothed his uniform. "Surely this is coincidence. Allow me to demonstrate proper stealth technique." He stepped into line with the children, his specialized training evident in his confident stance. Katie beamed. "Okay, green light." The commander engaged his most advanced stalking protocols, each movement precisely calculated. The children simply ran past him, somehow making less noise despite their apparent chaos. Red light. Engstix froze in a textbook stealth pose. Katie's eyes narrowed as she scanned the players. "Mr. Purple Alien, you moved your tail. Back to the start." "What? Impossible. I am utilizing the shadow weave stillness technique." Engstix protested, his skin flushing with embarrassment. "Your tail totally twitched," Tommy Thompson added helpfully from his frozen position. "You gotta be like a statue." Lieutenant Carell's datapad was working overtime. "Admiral, these children are demonstrating advanced perception abilities that exceed our military screening tests, and their freeze response time is, I can't even measure it with our current equipment." Zivix watched as Katie caught 3 more players before a small girl named Emily reached the finish line. Having mastered the art of incremental movement and instant stillness, she celebrated with a victory dance that somehow incorporated 3 different martial arts stances. "Lieutenant Carell," Zivix said quietly, "update the report to High Command. Add that humans have developed a training program that teaches advanced stealth techniques through, what did they call it? Having fun." Katie skipped over to them, her pigtails still bouncing. "Want to play again? I'll let you be the caller this time." Zivix looked at Commander Engstix, who was still grumbling about tail control parameters, then back at Katie. "Perhaps a demonstration would be valuable for our research." 5 minutes later, the Admiral of the 7th Fleet found himself facing a wall, calling out green light and red light, while trying to catch young humans in motion. Somehow, they moved like quantum particles, seemingly in 2 places at once until directly observed. "This is unprecedented," he muttered to Carell between calls. "Their training begins so early, they don't even recognize it as training. How do we defend against warriors who learned battlefield movement before basic mathematics? Admiral, Corell replied, watching his 6-year-old execute a perfect stationary hover mere inches from the finish line. I don't think we can. As the game continued, Zivix couldn't shake the feeling that every playground on Earth was producing soldiers more naturally gifted than his best troops, and they were doing it between nap time and snacks. In his next report, he formally requested that the Confederation's entire stealth training program be redesigned around what Katie Williams could teach them in a single recess period. Principal James Cooper found Admiral Zivix staring through the gymnasium window with all 4 eyes dilated in horror. Inside, Miss Thompson's second-grade class was playing Simon Says during their rainy day recess. "Is everything all right, Admiral?" Cooper asked, watching the alien scales ripple through various shades of alarmed purple. "How long?" Zivix demanded, pressing one scaled hand against the glass. "How long has Earth been implementing this command structure conditioning program?" "Command structure? Oh, you mean Simon Says. Pretty much forever. I played it when I was a kid too." Inside the gym, Miss Thompson stood before her class. "Simon Says, put your hands on your head." 20 children instantly complied with military precision. Lieutenant Corell, who had infiltrated the group by sitting cross-legged on the floor, and somehow still managed to look official in her Confederation uniform, frantically recorded the response times. "Now jump up and down," Miss Thompson called out. Only 3 children fell for it. The rest remained perfectly still, hands locked firmly on their heads. "Incredible," Zivix whispered. "They're exhibiting advanced command verification protocols. Even our veteran units require neural implants to achieve this level of order discrimination." Simon Says spin in a circle. The children spun with chaotic enthusiasm, yet somehow maintained perfect awareness of their spacing. No collisions, no confusion, just seamless execution of orders. "Touch your toes." This time, only one child moved. Tommy Thompson, who was too busy watching Lieutenant Corell's datapad to pay attention. "Admiral," Corell called out, her voice tight with professional concern. "You need to see these metrics. Their command processing speed is off the charts, and they're learning to filter valid orders from false ones faster than our orbital defense systems." Principal Cooper chuckled. "Well, they've had a lot of practice. We usually play this on rainy days." Zivix's ceremonial cape billowed dramatically, this time from the AC vent he was standing under. "You mean to tell me this advanced command response training is your backup program? What do you do on sunny days?" "Dodgeball," Cooper replied cheerfully, immediately sending the Admiral into another panic spiral. Inside the gym, Miss Thompson had stepped aside, letting little Jessica Martinez take over as Simon. The 6-year-old stepped forward with the confidence of a fleet commander. "Simon Says, act like your favorite animal." The room exploded into a menagerie of movements. Lieutenant Corell watched in amazement as the children instantly adapted to quadrupedal locomotion, predatory stalking patterns, and even complex flight simulations. "They're practicing rapid adaptation to different movement styles," Zivix muttered, his scales now a pale yellow of revelation. "It's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant." "Stand on one foot," Jessica commanded, then quickly added, "Simon didn't say." Not a single child moved. Their animal impressions continued uninterrupted. "Admiral," Corell reported, her voice shaking slightly. "They're maintaining their previous commands while processing and rejecting false orders. This goes beyond anything in our training manuals." Zivix turned to Principal Cooper, all 4 eyes narrowing. "You claim this is just a game?" "Of course. The kids love it." Although Cooper stroked his chin thoughtfully, "I suppose it does teach them to listen carefully and follow instructions." Instructions. Zivix's scales shifted to emergency red. They're learning instantaneous command response, order verification, tactical adaptation, and maintenance of previous directives, all while maintaining unit cohesion in a chaos scenario. "Simon Says, freeze like a statue," Jessica's voice rang out. The entire class, still in their animal poses, froze instantly. Lieutenant Corell's datapad started smoking from the speed of her calculations. Principal Cooper, Zivik said gravely, I believe I need to participate in this training exercise. For research purposes, of course. 5 minutes later, the Admiral of the 7th Fleet found himself sitting cross-legged on the gymnasium floor next to Lieutenant Corell, following the commands of a gap-toothed 6-year-old who had somehow managed to get him to hop on one foot while patting his head. In his next report to High Command, he requested immediate implementation of Simon Says in all Confederation training facilities. He carefully omitted the part where he had been eliminated first in 3 consecutive rounds. Some details were best left classified. Emperor's light preserve us, Admiral Zivix whispered as he watched the scene unfold before him. They've developed portable territory control training. Coach Ashley Martinez raised an eyebrow. You mean Foursquare? It's just a game with a rubber ball. The Admiral's scales flickered between tactical gray and alarmed crimson as he watched 4 children engage in what he could only describe as advanced psychological warfare disguised as recreation. The painted squares on the ground might as well have been planetary sectors for all the strategic complexity he was witnessing. Just observe, he instructed Lieutenant Corell, who had upgraded to a military-grade datapad after her previous one melted. Notice how they maintain perfect positioning while executing complex projectile trajectories. In the King Square, Tommy Thompson bounced the red rubber ball with calculated precision. His target, Sarah Chen in the Knight Square, was already moving to intercept, her feet performing a dance that mirrored advanced combat positioning. Cherry bomb, Tommy called out, launching the ball high into the air. That's their designation for orbital strikes, Zivix muttered, his ceremonial cape rustling anxiously. The targeting calculations alone should be beyond their capabilities. Sarah caught the ball with casual ease, immediately spinning to deliver what the children called a snake shot toward Marcus Rodriguez in the Bishop Square. The ball skimmed the ground in a pattern that would have made a missile guidance system jealous. Admiral, Corell reported, her voice tense with professional concern, I'm detecting complex alliance formations and instant betrayals. The political maneuvering is beyond our diplomatic corps' theoretical models. She was right. As they watched, Katie Williams in the Peasant Square formed a temporary alliance with Marcus to target Tommy's position, only to turn on her ally the moment Tommy was successfully deposed. Out, several children called from the waiting line as Tommy's return shot landed outside his square. The succession protocols are ruthless, Zivix observed as Tommy accepted his defeat with dignity, moving to the end of the waiting line while everyone else rotated positions. No crying, no complaints. They understand the brutal nature of power dynamics at such a young age. Coach Martinez tried not to laugh. They're just having fun, Admiral. Though I have to break up arguments about what counts as a legal serve sometimes. Legal serves, the Admiral's scales paled. They've developed their own system of martial law. A heated debate had broken out about whether Katie's latest shot was too spicy, apparently their term for excessive force. Zivix watched in amazement as the children engaged in rapid negotiation, established precedent by citing previous games, and reached a binding resolution in less time than it took the Confederation Council to agree on a lunch menu. Look at their line management, Corell added, gesturing to the children waiting their turn. Perfect cue discipline, maintained without external enforcement, and they're using the waiting time to study current players' techniques and form strategic alliances for future games. Zivix couldn't argue with her assessment. He'd seen less organized behavior in veteran starship crews. Perhaps we should, he began, but was interrupted by a shout from the court. Hey, Mr. Space Admiral. Sarah called out. We need one more player. Hannah had to go to the nurse's office. Before Zivix could formulate a properly dignified response, he found himself standing in the Peasant Square, a rubber ball in his scaled hands, facing 3 children who suddenly looked far more intimidating than any enemy fleet he'd encountered. "Remember," Katie said sweetly from the King's Square, "no holding, no catching, and no double bounces, and we play with cherry bombs and spicy serves." The next 5 minutes became what would later be classified as Tactical Event 2187, the Four-Square Catastrophe. Admiral Zivix, decorated commander of the 7th Fleet, discovered that his years of military strategy meant nothing against elementary school playground politics. His first serve was declared too baby by unanimous decision. His attempt at a cherry bomb went wildly off course, nearly hitting Lieutenant Corell's new datapad. When Katie executed a perfect snake shot combined with a diplomatic power play that turned all other players against him, he didn't stand a chance. "Don't feel bad, Mr. Space Admiral," Sarah consoled him as he headed to the back of the line. "You just need more practice, and maybe better alliances." In his subsequent report to High Command, Zivix recommended immediate implementation of Four-Square protocols in all Confederation diplomatic training programs. Some games, he realized, were actually warfare in disguise, and humanity's children were grandmasters. Admiral Zivix hunched behind a playground bench, his scales shifted to surveillance gray, as he observed what his latest report would call the Circular Combat Initiative. Lieutenant Corell crouched beside him, her new reinforced datapad equipped with a cooling system after the previous 2 failures. "Initial analysis confirms our worst fears," she whispered. "The exercise begins with psychological warfare. The target selector maintains complete control over timing and victim selection." Before them, a circle of first graders sat cross-legged on the grass, while Emma Patterson walked around them, lightly tapping each head while saying "duck." The tension in the air was thick enough to trigger Zivix's combat sensors. "Look at their positioning," the Admiral noted. "Perfect circular formation, maintained without markers or guides. Even our elite units require ground projectors for such precision." Miss Thompson, supervising nearby, smiled at their intense observation. "You seem very interested in duck, goose, Admiral. Would you like to join them?" "Join?" Zivix's scales flickered to anxious purple. "You mean, participate in the tactical exercise?" "Duck, duck, duck." Emma continued her circuit, each tap causing micro-adjustments in the seated children's postures. "They're maintaining perfect situational awareness," Corell muttered, her fingers flying across her datapad. Every subject tracking the target selector's position without visible head movement. The neural training implications are staggering. "Guos!" Emma's hand came down on Tommy Thompson's head, and chaos erupted. "By the sacred moons," Zivix breathed, watching Tommy launch from a seated position into a full sprint. "The acceleration curves are impossible. No warning, no preparation stance, just instant maximum velocity." Emma ran giggling around the circle while Tommy gave chase, both children demonstrating what Corell's readings identified as advanced pursuit algorithms and optimal path selection. "Admiral." Corell's voice shook slightly. The other subjects maintained perfect formation despite the high-speed chase occurring inches from their positions. "The discipline required." Emma slid into Tommy's vacant spot with precision that would make a starfighter pilot jealous. Tommy, accepting his new role as target selector, immediately began his own circuit. "Notice the instant role adaptation," Zivix commented. "Defender becomes attacker, pursuit becomes evasion, all without hesitation or confusion. We spend years training our troops to handle such tactical shifts." The game continued, each round revealing new layers of complexity to the alien observers. When Sarah Chen was selected, she demonstrated what Corell classified as enhanced evasion techniques by briefly reversing direction. Jason Martinez showed mastery of tactical deception by fake-stepping one way before running another. "Admiral," Miss Thompson interrupted their intense observation. "The children would really love if you joined in." Before Zivix could formulate a proper diplomatic response, he found himself seated in the circle, his ceremonial cape pulled awkwardly around him. "Lieutenant Corell, after some hesitation, joined as well, promising herself this was purely for research purposes. Duck, duck, duck. Little Emma moved around the circle again, her small hand patting each head with ceremonial precision. Zivix's combat training kicked in. He calculated optimal escape vectors, prepared his muscles for instant acceleration, and ran probability matrices for target selection. Guos! The tiny hand descended on his scaled head. What followed would be redacted from official reports, but lived on in playground legend. Admiral Zivix, veteran of 3 Galactic campaigns, discovered that no amount of military training prepared one for the pure chaos of children's games. His attempt to stand while entangled in his cape resulted in what the children would later describe as the biggest whoopsie ever. His pursuit path, while mathematically perfect, failed to account for Emma's complete disregard for conventional physics and logic. "You're supposed to run the other way," several children helpfully called out as he sprinted in the wrong direction. By the time he recovered and corrected course, Emma had claimed his spot with a kind of tactical brilliance that made his previous victory assessments seem woefully inadequate. "Your turn to be it," she declared cheerfully. In his next report to High Command, Zivix requested a complete overhaul of the Confederation's pursuit training protocols. He also, though this was deeply classified, asked for a personal consultation with Emma Patterson about her advanced tactical movement techniques. The duck-to-goose ratio analysis he'd ordered remained inconclusive, primarily because the mathematics required didn't exist yet in any known civilization. The Thompson house buzzed with the chaos of Tommy's birthday party. Admiral Zivix stood in the corner of the living room, his scales cycling through various shades of concern as Mrs. Thompson arranged chairs in a circle. "Lieutenant Corell," he whispered to his faithful analyst, "they're initiating some form of resource competition drill in a civilian setting." Actually, Tommy bounced over, wearing a party hat that somehow made him look more threatening to the Admiral's trained eye. "It's musical chairs. You have to get a seat when the music stops." Zivix's sensory ridges twitched at the word music. Acoustic-based combat training. Brilliant, using rhythmic patterns to mask movement sounds. Mrs. Thompson started the music on her phone, and a dozen sugar-enhanced children began circling the chairs. Lieutenant Corell's reinforced datapad hummed as it analyzed their movement patterns. "Admiral," she reported, "they're maintaining optimal spacing while conducting continuous threat assessment of both the available resources and competing units." "Just like the Centaurian resource wars," Zivix muttered. But these children executed instinctively. The music stopped. What followed would later be classified as Incident Report 394, the Birthday Chaos Theory. 12 children moved with quantum precision, each finding a chair except for Marcus Rodriguez, who accepted his elimination with dignity that would shame a Confederation honor guard. "Notice their resource allocation efficiency," Corell whispered as Mrs. Thompson removed one chair. "No wasteful conflicts, no extended disputes. Pure tactical decisiveness." Round after round, the competition intensified. Sarah Chen demonstrated advanced spatial awareness by claiming a chair while seemingly moving in the opposite direction. Katie Williams executed what Corell's data classified as a perfectly optimized slide maneuver. "Admiral," Tommy called out, "you should play too. We need more players for the next round." Before Zivix could protest, he found himself roped into the circular procession, his ceremonial cape swishing in time with the chicken dance. "This is strictly for research purposes," he informed Lieutenant Corell, who was trying not to smile as she recorded the scene. The music played. Zivix analyzed. The children, showing complete disregard for his careful strategic planning, simply skipped along, occasionally making faces at each other. The music stopped. What happened next would require 3 separate reports and a formal inquiry by the Confederation's Physics Division. Admiral Zivix, applying advanced tactical principles, attempted to secure a chair using a maneuver that had won him praise in the Academy. 6-year-old Tommy Thompson, operating on nothing but birthday cake energy, and pure instinct, claimed the same chair using what could only be described as a violation of several universal constants. The resulting collision sent the Admiral spinning, his cape tangling with another chair, creating what the children would later describe as the biggest birthday pinwheel ever. When the chaos settled, Zivix found himself sprawled on the floor, while Tommy sat triumphantly in the contested chair. "That was awesome," Tommy exclaimed. "Do it again." "Admiral," Corell reported, trying to keep her voice professional despite the party hat she'd somehow acquired. "I believe we've discovered why human children's birthday parties are classified as controlled chaos events." Zivix rose with as much dignity as he could muster, his scales cycling through embarrassed patterns. "Update the report to High Command. Note that humans begin training for resource competition scenarios before they can even read." And they celebrated. "With cake," Tommy added helpfully, offering a slice to the still-dazed Admiral. In his final analysis, Zivix had to admit that musical chairs represented perhaps the most elegant training simulation he'd ever encountered. It taught resource management, spatial awareness, quick decision-making, and tactical movement, all while the trainees thought they were having fun. The fact that he'd been outmaneuvered by a 6-year-old would be classified at the highest levels, though the video Lieutenant Corell recorded somehow became a hit at the Confederation War College. "Next we're playing Pin the Tail on the Donkey," Tommy announced. Zivix's scales paled to alarmed white. "Blindfolded projectile targeting practice. These humans are unstoppable." Lincoln Elementary's annual field day had transformed the playground into what Admiral Zivix could only describe as the most cheerful military training ground in the galaxy. Banners fluttered in the spring breeze, parents clutched coffee cups and cameras, and children buzzed with excitement. "Admiral," Lieutenant Corell reported, her datapad now equipped with a quantum cooling system. "They're integrating all the training exercises into one comprehensive event. The tactical implications are staggering." Principal Cooper approached, wearing a shirt that read Field Day Coordinator, which Zivix immediately classified as a command designation. "Ready to help judge the three-legged race, Admiral." Three-legged, Zivix's scales shifted to analytical blue. "You mean the advanced synchronized movement training?" "Sure," Cooper chuckled. "Though mostly it's just fun watching the kids try not to fall over." The field had been divided into stations, sack races testing adaptation to movement restriction, egg and spoon races developing steady-hand protocols, and tug-of-war demonstrating pure force application. But it was the water balloon toss that truly captured the Admiral's attention. "Look at their projectile trajectory calculations," he whispered to Corell as Sarah and Tommy perfectly lobbed a water balloon back and forth. "They're accounting for wind resistance, parabolic arcs, and catching force distribution, all while giggling. The most effective training program is one the trainees don't recognize as training," Corell noted, then ducked as a stray water balloon sailed overhead. Zivix watched as children naturally formed teams, developed strategies, and adapted to changing conditions faster than his best military units. They showed no fear of failure, no hesitation in trying new approaches, and most importantly, they were learning at an unprecedented rate. Then it hit him, like a dodgeball to the scales, which had happened twice during his investigation. The revelation struck with perfect clarity. "Lieutenant Corell," he announced, his ceremonial cape billowing dramatically in the breeze, "I've been looking at this all wrong. These aren't combat training exercises disguised as games. Sir, these are games that just happen to teach every skill a species needs to survive and thrive. The humans haven't created the galaxy's most efficient military training program. They've created the galaxy's most efficient learning program." As if to demonstrate his point, the three-legged race began. Children bound together at the ankle moved with more coordination than most binary species, learning instantly how to compensate for each other's movements. "But sir, the tactical applications are secondary to the primary purpose," Zivix interrupted. "Look at them, Lieutenant. Really look." Corell observed as children failed, got up, tried again, learned, adapted, and succeeded, all while laughing. No drill instructor could achieve such results. No training program could instill such natural innovation. Computer, Zivix commanded. Begin recording final report to high command. He straightened his posture, scales shifting to formal presentation mode. After extensive investigation of Earth's youth training protocols, I, Admiral Zivix, recommend immediate peaceful alliance with humanity. Not because they are potentially dangerous, though they are, but because they have mastered something far more valuable than combat training. They have mastered the art of learning through joy. A water balloon exploded against his back, interrupting the recording. Tommy's apologetic, "Sorry, Mr. Space Admiral," was followed by poorly suppressed giggles. Furthermore, Zivix continued, water dripping from his scales. I recommend immediate implementation of cultural exchange programs, starting with playground construction on all Confederation worlds. And he paused for dramatic effect. I volunteer to oversee the first intergalactic field day. 6 months later, Zivix stood on the newly constructed playground of the Confederation's first human games training academy. Young aliens of various species attempted hopscotch, while human children taught them the finer points of duck, duck, goose. His scales glowed with pride as a young Centaurian finally completed a successful jump rope sequence. Admiral, Lieutenant Krell approached, her datapad recording the historic moment. The Human Games Integration Treaty has been ratified. Earth is officially our newest ally. Excellent. Zivix watched as Tommy Thompson taught a group of alien children the proper technique for throwing water balloons. You know, Lieutenant, perhaps it's time we organized a game of capture the flag. For research purposes, of course. Of course, sir. Corell smiled. Though perhaps we should start with something simpler. I hear Simon says is good for beginners. Zivix's scales flushed with remembered embarrassment, but he nodded. After all, the best warriors in the galaxy had learned everything they needed to know in kindergarten. It was time the rest of the universe caught up.